faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today I'm interpreting the book titled Six Frigates, with the subtitle The Birth of the U.S. Navy and the Launch of a Nation. The author is Ian Toll, a lecturer at the U.S. Naval War College and a naval history researcher. Today's U.S. Navy boasts being the world's largest, most advanced, and strongest naval force. It operates over 240 overseas bases, with hundreds of warships cruising globally to secure key strategic spots. Controlling vital shipping lanes is a key tool for the U.S. government to meddle in global politics and act as the so-called world police. But back over 200 years ago, the U.S. Navy wasn't some big shot. Its whole fleet was just 6 main warships. Forget global dominance. That was Britain's thing, and the U.S. Navy often couldn't even protect home waters. So, it got slammed by folks at home as wasting taxpayer money and was nearly disbanded.
Believe it or not, this tiny navy once sailed across the Atlantic into the Mediterranean to guard American merchant ships.
Even more shocking, after the War of 1812 began, the U.S. Navy fought brilliantly. Ships like USS President and USS Constitution shone, sparking America's sea spirit. Now, America started building an ocean-going navy and rose to become a top naval power. So the Navy and Americans hold deep affection for these 6 warships from the early days. Take the legendary USS Constitution. It's been repaired over time, still managed by the Navy, and sails occasionally to make a splash. In 2010, President Obama designated it as a National Historic Landmark, showing how revered it is. In the book Six Frigates, Ian Toll stars these 6 warships: USS United States, Constitution, President, Chesapeake, and Philadelphia, using rich history and vivid prose to chart the Navy's rise. I'll break this down into 3 parts. Part 1, the birth and rebuilding of the U.S. Navy. Part 2, 3 key wars that laid the foundation for development. Part 3, from legendary battles to an ocean-going Navy. Okay, let's start with Part 1. The birth and rebuilding of the U.S. Navy. Historians often trace the U.S. Navy's history back to 1775. That April, colonial militias in British North America attacked British troops, firing the first shot of the American Revolutionary War. Soon after, representatives of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the Continental Congress, deciding to form the Continental Army and appoint Washington as commander-in-chief. Broad. The Continental Congress also established a Marine Committee, tasking 7 members to build a navy. Among them was John Adams, who'd become the second U.S. president. His political skills were undeniable, but back then he knew almost nothing about the sea or navy, a common problem for the whole committee. So the outcome was predictable. Oh, fuck. Like, during the Revolutionary War, the U.S. built 13 warships total. 7 got captured by the British Royal Navy. 4 were blown up by their own men to avoid enemy capture. The newborn U.S. Navy suffered a crushing blow before it could even fight. If not for the strong help from the French and Spanish navies, the U.S. would have totally lost control of North American waters.
Such a poor show left Americans really unhappy. So right after the war, the last few warships were all auctioned off, basically resetting the Navy to 0. When the U.S. federal government formed, the budget didn't even include the Navy, because taxpayers didn't want to waste cash. But some money's gotta be spent, or you'll pay a bigger price.
Americans quickly tasted the bitter fruit of having no navy. First, Britain choked them. Before the Revolutionary War, North America's trade depended heavily on the Caribbean islands. North American flour, meat, salted fish, and such kept flowing in exchange for sugar and coffee from the Caribbean. After U.S. independence, Britain banned American merchant ships from British Caribbean islands like Jamaica and the Bahamas. This slammed U.S. overseas trade. Hey, aren't other Caribbean spots like Cuba, Haiti, and Puerto Rico held by European powers? The U.S. could trade with them, right? That's what they say. But the Caribbean was crawling with pirates. Before the war, North American ships had British Royal Navy escorts to stay safe. But now, with the Royal Navy pulling protection, American ships were left helpless, getting hit by pirates and trade blockades all the time. Plus, pirate raids caused U.S. trade with the Caribbean islands to drop by over 50%, leading to docks turning deserted. Sailors and shipbuilders had no jobs, and farmers and fishermen lost their livelihoods. Merchants moaned that business was 10 times worse than before, and everything was just awful. Americans' first reaction was, since traditional markets were cut off, to explore new market directions. Two options: China and Europe. In 1785, an American merchant ship named Empress of China sailed to Guangzhou loaded with leather, pepper, and American ginseng. When it returned the next year, it brought back silk, tea, and porcelain. This voyage invested $120,000 and profited $37,000, a 30% return. Many merchant ships followed suit, bringing American goods into the Chinese market. But since the Panama Canal hadn't been built yet, ships sailing from America's east coast to China had to cross the Atlantic, round the Cape of Good Hope, then sail thousands more kilometers across the Indian Ocean, making the journey extremely long. So America preferred developing European markets, signing treaties with France, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and others. This let America enter Europe's most prosperous trade zone, the Mediterranean. By the late 1700s, about 100 U.S. ships with 1,200 sailors delivered 20,000 tons of sugar, flour, rice, salted fish, and timber there annually, returning with wine, lemons, opium, and olive oil. But Mediterranean trade wasn't smooth sailing either. American ships faced pirate raids again, and these pirates were tougher than Caribbean ones because they were backed by the Barbary states, and a Mediterranean fashion for the pirates. The Barbary states generally referred to 4 North African nations along the Mediterranean's southern coast: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, west to east. They nominally pledged loyalty to the Ottoman Empire, with rulers called pashas or sultans, but actually governed independently. Oh, no. With no agriculture or industry, piracy was the traditional livelihood for people in the Barbary states. In July 1785, Algerian pirates captured 2 American ships, looted all goods, and enslaved the crew. U.S. Ambassador to France Thomas Jefferson sought French help. France advised paying ransom, standard practice among European nations. Though Britain, France, and Spain had strong navies that could easily handle pirates, rooting them out was nearly impossible. So they preferred paying tribute to the Barbary states. The French told Jefferson that since America's navy was so weak, their tribute would need to be higher. How much higher? The Pasha of Algiers demanded $1 million annually, plus nearly $60,000 to ransom captured sailors, with separate tributes still due to Morocco, Tunis, and Tripoli. Compared to other countries paying around $100,000 annually, this was an outrageous extortion targeting America. Jefferson firmly refused, angering the Barbary states, who began systematically plundering U.S. merchant ships. Almost immediately, U.S. Mediterranean trade came to a standstill. With no choice, the U.S. government paid the tribute for temporary peace. The harsh truth hit Americans. Their navy was truly inadequate. In January 1794, the U.S. House passed a resolution to build a fleet, assigning the task to War Secretary Henry Knox. Knox knew naval power depended on warships and sailors. Now, for warship design, he chose Joshua Humphreys. Humphreys was a Philadelphia shipbuilder who'd constructed over 230 merchant vessels. His deep knowledge of ship architecture made him perfect for warships. True to form, he immersed himself completely in warship R&D upon appointment. All warships then were wooden sail-powered vessels, categorized into 3 classes. First-class ships of the line carried 74 guns, massive vessels serving as naval flagships. Second-class frigates were smaller with 20 to 50 guns, operating alongside ships of the line or independently. Third-class unrated vessels had fewer than 20 guns, like brig and sloop, used for support roles. After research, Humphreys argued ships of the line were too costly and complex for the U.S., requiring elite crews like Britain's. Instead, America should build frigates as its core. So, he insisted on arming each frigate with 44 guns, enough to battle pirates and withstand ships of the line. This was criticized as excessive overkill, but Humphreys held firm. History proved him right when America later fought France and Britain. Thus, the U.S. Navy settled on 6 44-gun frigates as its core fleet, to be built across 6 cities including Philadelphia and Boston.
With ships planned, recruitment began. News of the Navy's revival flooded Knox's desk with applications. Politicians and merchants even lobbied President Washington directly.
To those seeking favors for relatives, Washington was clear. Competence mattered more than connections. He bluntly told an old friend, "Your son isn't fit to be a captain, not even qualified as a midshipman. Please leave." Washington and Knox pushed past interference, selecting 6 captains and tasking them with overseeing their ship's construction. On May 10, 1877, the U.S. Navy's first true warship, the 1,500-ton USS United States, launched in Philadelphia, followed by Constellation and Constitution. 3 more frigates were under construction. But as global tensions shifted, the Navy's enemies expanded beyond pirates to include France and Britain. This posed a whole new challenge for the fledgling U.S. Navy. How did it grow? Part 2 explores the Navy's growth through 3 key wars. The author argues 3 wars laid the foundation for the early U.S. Navy: the Quasi-War with France, the Mediterranean Campaign, and the War of 1812.
First, the Quasi-War, the Navy's baptism by fire.
During the Revolutionary War, France gave massive aid to America. Post-war, when Britain blockaded U.S. trade, France opened its markets, preventing economic collapse. So they'd been allies. But relations soured in the late 1700s, mainly because America kept trying to cozy up to Britain. Things finally boiled over in 1795 with the Jay Treaty. This treaty let British ships freely navigate U.S. inland waterways and recognized British trade dominance in the Caribbean in exchange for Britain ending its blockade. France was then fighting Britain's anti-French coalition. To France, America's move felt like betrayal. The French government recalled its ambassador to the U.S. It warned that French warships would search all American merchant vessels and confiscate entire ships if they found British goods. France also sent privateers to harass the U.S. coast. Privateers were state-licensed armed civilian ships that raided enemy merchants, basically government-sanctioned pirates. The 2 nations were now at war. But since neither formally declared war, it's called the Quasi-War. France mainly used privateers. Over 30 French ones controlled waters between the U.S. and Cuba, effectively strangling America's overseas trade. The U.S. Navy had to step in.
The 3 commissioned frigates, USS United States, Constitution, and Constellation, all deployed to escort merchant ships.
With 44 guns each, U.S. frigates easily overpowered lightly armed privateers. Congress funded conversions of merchant ships into smaller warships for support. This gave the U.S. Navy overwhelming superiority, resulting in French privateers being sunk or captured one after another. By 1798, the Navy captured about 90 privateers, then seized 38 more in Caribbean waters the next year, nearly wiping out French privateers. Even regular piracy dropped significantly under U.S. naval pressure. OUSS Constellation severely damaged the French frigate L'Avange, marking the Navy's first major victory, proving U.S. sailors matched Europe's best.
Statistics show naval escorts prevented over $9 million in shipping losses during the Quasi-War.
Compared to the Navy's $1.04 annual budget, this was tremendous value. For the first time, the government recognized the Navy's worth, and rushed to complete the remaining 3 frigates. In 1800, Napoleon, who seized power via coup, halted hostilities against America to isolate Britain, ending the quasi-war. By then, all 6 U.S. frigates were complete. The earlier United States, Constitution, Constellation, plus wartime launches, President, Chesapeake, and Philadelphia. The U.S. Navy had truly formed. Next, the Second War. The Mediterranean Campaign, the Navy's proving ground. With the French conflict over, Americans refocused on the Mediterranean. This made sense. The 1800 presidential election winner was Thomas Jefferson, who'd paid tribute to the Barbary states 15 years earlier. And he considered it a profound humiliation. Worse, the Barbary states constantly broke agreements. Protection fees agreed upon would soon be nullified, demanding renegotiation. For example, Tripoli's Pasha Yusuf dramatically raised demands, threatening U.S. merchant safety if unmet. Jefferson angrily declared, "I will endure this no longer." So Jefferson sent a Mediterranean squadron, flagship USS Constitution, supported by Philadelphia plus smaller warships, to Tripoli, commanded by Constitution's Captain Edward Preble, a Revolutionary War naval veteran. At dawn on August 12, 1803, the Mediterranean squadron sailed from Boston, launching America's first overseas expedition. After a month, they entered Gibraltar, where the Atlantic meets the Mediterranean. This was one of Britain's most crucial overseas bases. After the Jade Treaty, U.S.-British relations had improved. Facing fellow English-speaking sailors, the Royal Navy showed goodwill, letting Preble use Gibraltar as a base, giving the squadron a foothold.
Preble first sent warships to patrol Moroccan waters, capturing a pirate vessel with orders from the Pasha. Seize all American ships. 10, 10, 10. Oh, you're treating America like a cash cow to milk dry!
Preble immediately led the squadron to a Moroccan port for a show of force. The Moroccan Pasha was intimidated, pledging to halt hostilities against U.S. ships, boosting Preble's confidence. He dispatched USS Philadelphia to blockade Tripoli. This 1,240-ton, 44-gun frigate was second only to Constitution in firepower. Preble was sure Pasha Yusuf would back down the moment Philadelphia appeared.
On October 31st, 1803, Philadelphia approached Tripoli at dawn, spotted a pirate ship, gave chase, but accidentally ran aground in shallow waters, stuck fast.
Crew threw cannons overboard to lighten her, but she wouldn't budge.
Yusuf watched it all, instantly sending 9 gunboats that blasted Philadelphia's masts. Her officers met and agreed resistance was pointless. Surrender.
Thus, Philadelphia became the first captured U.S. flagship, with 307 crew held hostage as Yusuf demanded a massive ransom.
News spread, turning the U.S. Navy into Europe's laughingstock. A flagship captured by pirates. Useless! Only then did Preble start gathering intel. Intel revealed Tripoli harbor had 115 cannons and swarms of gunboats. Yusuf even rearmed Philadelphia as a harbor defense. Preble only had Constitution plus 4 support ships, grossly outmatched.
In desperation, destroying Philadelphia became the only face-saving move, a mission handed to 25-year-old Stephen Decatur.
Stephen Decatur. In February 1804, Decatur sailed the disguised merchant ship Intrepid into Tripoli harbor, and guards mistook it for their own vessel.
Caught off guard, as they neared Philadelphia, Decatur shouted, grabbed her bowline first, swung over the rail onto the deck. 80 commandos followed, overwhelming and killing unprepared guards.
Commandos then spread out with resin-soaked candles, igniting flammable materials. Only when flames engulfed the ship did defenders react. Too late. Intrepid had already sailed away. Destroying Philadelphia demonstrated the U.S. Navy's capability and resolve. Yusuf then proposed freeing all prisoners and halting attacks on U.S. ships for 5 years. If America paid $300,000, Yusuf thought this generous compared to Sweden and Portugal's $1 million tributes, but Preble flatly refused. He declared the U.S. would ransom prisoners but not pay a cent for peace. This marked a fundamental shift in U.S. foreign policy, rejecting bought peace, using military power to protect overseas interests.
This wasn't solely Preble's decision.
Behind him stood President Jefferson, who saw the Barbary states as insatiable. Jefferson sent 4 more frigates while pushing Congress to fund warships. Preble kept busy awaiting reinforcements. He borrowed 8 warships from Italy, added to his 7, and attacked Tripoli repeatedly, even blasting a cannonball through Yusuf's bedroom. This terrified Yusuf. Preble also contacted Yusuf's brother Hamid, promising to install him as Tripoli's pasha. Under this pressure, Yusuf backed down. In June 1805, he agreed to free Philadelphia's crew for $60,000.
Moreover, leveraging victory's momentum, no further payments were required.
Morocco, Tunis, and Algiers also pledged not to charge America tribute. By then, nearly 2 years had passed since the Mediterranean squadron's deployment.
In those years, the U.S. Navy subdued the Barbary states through strength and will, cementing its military prestige.
Now to the Third War, the War of 1812, the U.S. Navy's legendary battle. As mentioned earlier, after the Jay Treaty, Britain lifted its blockade, a major boon for America. Back then, Britain's anti-French coalition was fighting Napoleon's empire, turning Europe into a war zone. Neutral America sold supplies to both sides. Both sides profited massively from the war. American overseas trade exploded, hitting $78 million in 1804, $96 million in 1805, and over $100 million in 1806. Shipbuilding boomed too, with 100,000 tons of new vessels launched annually. But the good times didn't last. Late 1866, Napoleon imposed his continental system to strangle British overseas trade. Britain retaliated with a total embargo against France and its colonies. Both declared these bans applied to neutrals too.
Meaning, America couldn't trade with either the anti-French coalition or France and its allies.
Overseas trade, then, accounted for over half of U.S. government revenue. Cut that off, and the U.S. government would shut down. America's workaround? Secretly keep trading with both sides through loopholes. But this risked naval attacks. France was manageable. Its navy was crippled by Britain, so it turned a blind eye. Britain was different. The Royal Navy, the world's strongest naval force, controlled nearly all trade routes with global patrols. U.S. merchant ships had no escape, often intercepted the moment they entered the Caribbean. U.S. exports plummeted from a peak of $108 million annually to just $22 million, pushing the economy toward collapse. Worse, Britain's prolonged war against France created desperate sailor shortages, so when seizing U.S. ships, they confiscated cargo and impressed crew into service. This double robbery, stealing both goods and men, was pure hatred fuel.
Furious Americans vowed to teach the British a lesson, bringing military conflict to the brink.
In mid-May 1811, USS President patrolled near New York when it encountered HMS Little Belt.
President's 44 guns overpowered Little Belt's mere 20.
The clash killed 9 British sailors, wounded 23, and left the warship severely damaged.
News sparked cheers in American media and curses in British, igniting fury on both sides. The U.S. Congress passed a resolution to increase military spending and expand the Army and Navy in preparation for war. In June 1812, the House voted 79 to 49 and the Senate 17 to 13 to declare war on Britain. President Madison promptly signed the declaration, officially starting the War of 1812. The U.S. strategy focused on the Army attacking British-held Canada, with the Navy playing a supporting role, a sensible approach. Before the war, the U.S. Navy had only 19 warships, with just 6 frigates being combat-ready. The rest were small gunboats. What about Britain's naval strength?
They had over 600 active warships, plus 250 in reserve. Just in North American waters alone,
Britain deployed 97 warships there, including powerful ships of the line. Comparatively, Britain held overwhelming numerical and firepower superiority with far more combat experience than the U.S. Navy. Given this, the U.S. government held no illusions about defeating Britain at sea and pinned hopes on the Army capturing Canada. The Navy's orders: hide in ports to preserve strength and only harass British supply lines if possible. That's it. The Navy disagreed. Commodore John Rogers argued that letting ships rust idly in port would demoralize sailors, rendering the fleet worthless. They must strike first, even if it meant dying in battle. So just 3 days after war was declared, Rogers led his fleet to sea in 1812. On June 23rd, Rogers' fleet clashed with a British frigate, firing the first shots of the war. Though the British retreated quickly with no decisive outcome, the U.S. Navy made its stance clear. They wouldn't wait to die. For 2 months afterward, the U.S. fleet patrolled the East Coast seeking opportunities. On August 19th, USS Constitution spotted HMS Barbary near Boston, and battle commenced. Both were 44-gun frigates, evenly matched. Victory would hinge on skill. Constitution proved superior, seizing the windward position. Her first broadside shattered Barbary's main mast. Follow-up volleys destroyed the other masts, leaving her dead in the water.
Then, USS Constitution used classic boarding tactics of the age of sail, organizing sailors to leap onto the enemy warship and eliminate resistance.
After fierce combat, HMS Barbary surrendered. As Constitution returned to Boston, sailors lining her rails shouted, "We've captured Barbary!" News spread fast. Docks filled with cheering crowds, church bells rang, militiamen fired celebratory shots. Joy swept across America. Americans had good reason to celebrate. The Army's Canadian invasion was going terribly. Not long before, a U.S. force surrendered to weaker British troops, a national humiliation. With the Army failing so badly, the Navy's success felt like a miraculous surprise. From then on, the Navy's heroic image took root in American hearts, and the war only strengthened it. In the following months, the Army remained weak, while the Navy captured 2 more British frigates and smaller ships, massively boosting morale. These wins came from avoiding fleets and targeting lone ships. Objectively, this hardly crippled Britain's navy.
But Britain, having dominated seas for decades, defeating Spain, Holland, France, couldn't stomach being humiliated by the upstart U.S. Navy. Worse, U.S. warships now raided Atlantic merchant ships, seizing 500 British vessels, crippling trade. Parliament demanded, "What is the mighty Royal Navy doing?"
In March 1813, Britain blockaded all U.S. coasts and banned solo engagements with U.S. frigates. The tide turned. 5 of the 6 frigates were trapped in ports. USS Chesapeake tried to break out, but was captured, though no one blamed her crew. Everyone knew Britain's overwhelming force would eventually prevail. The young U.S. Navy had done extraordinarily well. In March 1815, an Anglo-American truce ended the war, closing the Navy's chapter. All right, let's move to part 3. From legendary battles to an ocean-going Navy. If the Quasi-War was the Navy's founding battle and the Mediterranean campaign its prestige builder, so how do we understand that the Second Anglo-American War is considered a legendary battle? The author believes what left the deepest impression on Americans was how the tiny U.S. Navy repeatedly defeated the mightiest British Navy in history. A remarkable achievement. From then on, the Navy became a collective memory Americans took pride in, and its commanders from that war were celebrated as national heroes. Many cities and towns were named after them. Their images adorned homes through prints, wood carvings, and silver plaques. Their deeds were widely told, sparking a flood of naval-themed literature. Washington Irving, hailed as the father of American literature, wrote biographies of U.S. naval officers. Another great writer, Herman Melville, served aboard USS United States. Drawing from this, he wrote White Jacket. During his lifetime, it outsold his classic Moby Dick. More importantly, after these wars, the Navy proved its worth. No one dared ignore the need to maintain it. In 1823, U.S. President Monroe declared the Americas should no longer be colonized by European powers. Affairs of the Americas would be decided by its nations alone, free from European interference. Accordingly, the U.S. would stay neutral in European conflicts. This became the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe's confidence came from the Navy. He trusted it could repel any invasion. Indeed, by the mid-19th century, the U.S. Navy could defend American waters. Of course, until then, it remained a coastal defense force. Truly becoming an ocean-going Navy required major impetus. This brings us to Theodore Roosevelt, often called Teddy Roosevelt. Born in New York in 1858, young Teddy grew up hearing naval legends, sparking a deep interest in naval warfare. At 18, he entered Harvard to study law while researching naval battles. He meticulously analyzed the U.S. Navy's War of 1812 performance, writing The Naval War of 1812. Praised upon release, it became required reading at the U.S. Naval Academy. This made Roosevelt a naval authority, and with that prestige, he entered politics. In 1997, Roosevelt became Assistant Secretary of the Navy. In 1900, he was elected Vice President. The following year, President McKinley's assassination propelled him to become the 42nd U.S. President. Roosevelt is considered one of the most hawkish presidents in American history. He pursued aggressive expansionism, advocating competition with European powers to control the Atlantic and Pacific, enabling U.S. global influence. This required a powerful Navy. Roosevelt argued the Navy's initial success, then failure in the War of 1812, stemmed from weakness, confined to coastal waters until blockaded. The U.S. Navy could no longer settle for coastal defense. It needed power to destroy enemy fleets overseas. Simply put, the Navy must upgrade from coastal to ocean-going. Roosevelt convinced Congress to increase naval funding by 40%, exceeding $100 million for the first time. He built 10 battleships, 4 armored cruisers, and 17 smaller warships, forming the core of an ocean fleet. In 1907, Roosevelt ordered a global naval cruise to demonstrate power. Thus sailed an ocean fleet, 16 battleships with 14,000 sailors. Painted white, it became known as the Great White Fleet. From December 1907 to February 1909, it crossed the Pacific and Indian Oceans, transited the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, then recrossed the Atlantic, covering 80,000-plus kilometers. Port calls and naval exchanges worldwide showcased U.S. naval strength, causing a sensation. When the fleet returned, Roosevelt, nearing his term's end, remarked, "This is a perfect finale for me." But we know, for the U.S. Navy, this wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of its rise. Tempered by 2 world wars, the U.S. Navy eventually surpassed Britain's to become the world's strongest, far beyond its 6-frigate origins. And yet the Navy never forgot its roots. USS Constitution was deliberately preserved. Today, having served over 200 years, she's the world's oldest commissioned warship still afloat. Of course, USS Constitution no longer carries out military missions but serves as the nation's ship, promoting and preserving the U.S. Navy's heritage. So all right, that concludes 6 frigates, the birth of the U.S. Navy, and the launch of a nation. Listener notes are below the audio. See you next time.